It's an honor to be here today. We're going to get started in a second. First, I just want to do an introduction of our illustrious panel. My name is Stephanie Dano. I am the Executive Director of Lifespan.io and the Chief Business Officer of SENS Research Foundation. These are two longevity biotech nonprofits that just announced a merger, and I'll talk more about it in our discussion. And here we have Stephen Berenson from Flagship Capital. We also have Nir Barzilai from the Academy for Health and Lifespan Research. Followed by him is Jeff Huber from Triatomic Capital. And lastly, Abby Miller-Levy from Primetime Partners. And today, we're going to be having a very interesting discussion about longevity and programmable biology. I promise you we're going to break it down into lay terms, so don't feel intimidated. But there's a lot here that we're going to unpack. And what I'd like to do is get started on honestly talking about what is longevity. And it seems that there is no consensus on the definition, and there's a lot of different interpretations. You know, when I walk down the street and I mention that I'm in the field, some people say aesthetics, some people say transhumanism. And as it relates to all the business models that these representatives are actually advocating for, it may be something completely different. So we can just go down the line in a couple sentences. What is longevity to you and your business?
Is it okay if I start off simple?
Absolutely.
About live longer and live healthier.
Okay.
For me, longevity is age later, which is the title of my book. But for me, the word longevity is understood different by different people. Longevity is really the length of your life, whether it's short or long. That's your longevity. I think the most important thing for us is the health span, not the lifespan. And I like to use the term health span. By the way, it's the same mechanism. If we have less diseases, we also live longer. But I think health span is what longevity means to me. I can also say that my research, one of the research projects is about exceptional longevity. I'm looking for longevity genes in centenarians. But this is exceptional longevity. But I think health span is what we want to discuss.
Thank you.
So I'll focus on a particular dimension of longevity, which is a critical first step, which is first, don't die. When you look at the drivers of death, at least in the United States, it's cardiac conditions, heart disease, and cancer. And if we can prevent early deaths, unnecessary early deaths, that's the first step to achieving longevity.
And I'd add another dimension to the longevity term, because health span is usually what most people focus on when they think about longevity. But longevity is also the path to plan ahead for a longer life. And that includes health span, wealth span, you could say sex span, you could say at any important piece of life, plus the word span. And so part of this conversation here is trying to think about how do we plan ahead as individuals and as a society for what longevity means.
Would you guys mind turning the speakers up so I can hear them a little bit better? Appreciate it. So actually, I have a completely different, maybe it's not completely, but I have a different perspective on what longevity means as it relates to biotech. And the focus is really on reduction of suffering, because if you say longevity is transhumanism or living till 150, that is saying things that the general public doesn't understand. They've never seen it. And so what everyone here is doing is actually leveraging the thing that we can say is undeniable. You're born, you age, you suffer, and you die. And what do we want to do to kind of modify that process? And one thing is understanding what that process is at a cellular level. And I just want to use this as a kind of baseline. Nir, can you talk about the cellular implications and the definition from a scientific perspective of the word aging?
Sure. So we, the geroscientists, have gathered around a concept that's called hallmarks of aging. What does it take to be a hallmark of aging? You have to show that something goes wrong when you're old, and whether it's in your lab or animals by genetic methods or by drugs, you fix this hallmark and your animals live healthier and longer. That's how you become a hallmark. And we started with 7 hallmarks. There are like 14 hallmarks. The interesting thing about these hallmarks, and I don't need to count on all of them, but the interesting thing is if you fix one, you can have effects on all the others. And drugs that really target the biology of aging are actually targeting a lot of the hallmarks are changing. I don't want they're targeting a lot of the hallmarks, but a lot of the hallmarks are changing. So this is the concept of how we look at biology from a cellular level and also from a drug level, from a biotech level, because people who want to invent a biotech will tell me which hallmark should I target? And my answer is, if you had 14 daughters, can I ask you who's your favorite? I'm not going to answer, but this is a concept that is very important for everybody who looks at aging for biology or for investment.
One way to think about it, and this is extremely basic, is you have cells. Your body's made of billions of cells, and some of them, one of the hallmarks is senescence, they become dormant, and then they get in the way of the actual good cells being able to function properly. And that leads to aging symptoms that you experience. Wrinkling skin, gray hair. So the idea is if we can prevent those cells from becoming dormant and getting in the way, or we can get rid of the garbage cells after the fact, and that's called damage repair. So what you're seeing is two different mechanisms to targeting the aging process. And this is all the deep biotech stuff that's not science fiction anymore. But for today's purposes, we're also going to talk about what we can do today while those drugs are being developed. And I'd like to start with Abby. Your focus is a bit different as it relates to age tech and the business opportunities. So if you could talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I love what this side of the room is doing in terms of the life sciences side of how we can increase health span and ultimately lifespan. And so there was been many research reports on where is lifespan going. And the World Health Organization had a report that guessed that about 50% of people born after 2007 in the developed world will have the opportunity to live to 100. And that is absolutely what many of the folks on this panel focus on. I run a venture fund that focuses on what happens when that happens. Are we ready as a society, from our healthcare systems, our financial systems, our housing, our workforce, consumer media, travel, every element of society is impacted if indeed those predictions come true. And in fact, for the first time in US history, come 2060, there'll be more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18. Really taking what has been a population pyramid and flattening, straightening it out. And that has tremendous implications. And so I started a venture fund 4 years ago to say, we need entrepreneurs designing, building, making sure we address the infrastructure and societal implications of increase in health span and lifespan. And that's where it's been amazing, because over the past 4 years, we've looked at 2,000 startups. We do seed to Series A investing. And there absolutely is a tremendous opportunity to build big businesses to do, for example, the distribution of what Stephen's business has, with the invention of Moderna. How do you think Moderna got out to older adults, to seniors during COVID? You guys did the great work. I think you said something like a couple $2 billion of investment to get the vaccine where it was. Well, the startups we invest in make sure that gets distributed.
Right. And maybe, Stephen or Jeff, one of you could talk about how longevity and the word one is represented by your organization and the respective business strategy that you do.
Go for it.
You could say that everything we do is implicated in longevity, because we're trying to help people live longer and live healthier. And so it's become an overarching theme for us. It could be vaccines. Moderna is kind of exhibit A for us. But for example, we have a business we're creating called A Priori, where we believe using machine learning and other advanced computational tools, we can predict the evolutionary path of mutating viruses. And then you could imagine coming up with a vaccine that at the outset would extinguish all evolutionary branches of that virus. Wouldn't that be interesting, right? Or playing in a place where Jeff's played. We have a business called Harbinger Health, where we're looking to come up with a way to detect cancer at its earliest stage, stage 2, stage 1, even in a neoplastic state. That would be a game changer for longevity. I'll just pause there.
So, the title says programmable biology. What you're talking about is also a preventative mechanism using a diagnostic tool to be able to kind of see the future. And I'm telling you, this is not science fiction anymore. Another could be lifestyle changes. If I ask audiences, they often say, well, aging is inflammation and, we just want to have a better diet or exercise more. This is well beyond that. Those are baseline. And with that said, maybe you can talk a little bit about your business.
Sure. So I'm the latest chapter is a co-founder of a new venture capital firm and fund called Triatomic Capital. Our focus is around applied AI, which is our very opinionated view of where value will ultimately be generated with AI, kind of the next chapters of where AI goes. And it's a very data-first, data-centric approach, because if you look at the trajectory of AI, increasingly the output of AI systems is defined entirely by the data you feed it. So we invest in businesses that are data generators of important new proprietary data that are using AI to unlock and accelerate the value of it. A little bit of background and kind of launching from where Steve mentioned around early detection and the beginnings of my comments on the first step of longevity is first, don't die. Prior to Triatomic, I was the founding CEO of a biotech company called Grail, which is focused on cancer early detection.
This is a game changer, by the way, this organization, Grail.
Yeah. So we launched in 2016, raised over $1 billion, ran the largest clinical studies ever done, over 300,000 subjects, and then used that data to drive the first entirely AI-based, machine learning and deep learning-based product development process in life sciences that resulted in the launch of an industry-first multi-cancer early detection test segment that Harbinger, one of the flagship companies, is in now as well. And the goal of the product and mission of the company is to detect cancer early when it can be cured. And the effort is really to shift the playing field where today 80% of cancers are diagnosed at late stage. And when cancers are diagnosed at late stage, it's an uphill fight, and the prognosis is generally poor. The majority outcome is people die. And those in longevity speak, we would consider premature deaths, people that died needlessly earlier than they should or could have. With early detection, you can shift the playing field instead and be able to detect in stage 1 or stage 2, where the prognosis is flipped. The odds are in your favor that you'll survive and live the life that you should have been entitled to. So kind of first step of that is first don't die, and early detection in cancer, but in other conditions is really critical. The other side of it, and maybe tying into programmable biology, one of our investing themes is what we call engineered biology, which is precisely the ability that we are now developing that started 20 years ago with the massive breakthrough of the Human Genome Project, where now with genome sequencing, we can read DNA, we can read the code of life. Barely a decade later, we've got breakthroughs like CRISPR, where now we can edit and write the code of life. And we think that the intersection of those capabilities is incredibly profound. And you're already seeing it in the ability with new cell therapies and gene therapies to cure previously incurable diseases like sickle cell disease and cystic fibrosis. But we're just at the beginning of that, but the rate of learning and rate of growth is phenomenal. And ultimately, the real breakthroughs in the therapeutic war against cancer is going to come from our ability to engineer the immune system to do the right things. And we believe at Triatomic that ability, if there's one thing that stood out that has potential of defining the 21st century, it's our now ability to engineer biology at a cellular level, much of which can and will be applied to longevity.
But I want to pick up on something you said, which is really important for the investors in the room. We are just at the beginning. I mean, this really only has come about in the past 10, 15 years, both on the life sciences side and on the age tech side. And so we are just at the beginning of what is the biggest global mega trend, maybe outside of global warming, which is, I sometimes liken aging to the human version of global warming. And so all of the investment right now pales in comparison to what the opportunity is in this sector. And even if you just take, for example, something like biomarkers, in order to ultimately be able to deliver early detection, you need individuals to be able to start tracking and monitoring what's going on in their bodies at a cellular level. So one of the things that's very interesting is the biomarker business is about $80 billion right now, growing at 13% CAGR. We're going to see the ability, and it's being developed right now, to test signs of dementia through blood. I mean, already in cancer, it's blood tests. And so there's some industries that exist now, like phlebotomy, that pretty much every private equity firm has a phlebotomy roll-up because blood testing is the very important piece of this. It's reimbursable. Genomics is not yet reimbursable. And so we're going to see kind of society probably coming to move after the science comes first, and then the regulation and reimbursement and everything comes later. But I just can't even emphasize enough that, it is early days, but very good days to be an investor in this space.
Yeah, what I would say, even in our prep call, you said, and I quote, longevity, whatever your definition is, and it could be more than one of the terms we used earlier, is now the core underpinning principle of the entire healthcare economy. This is going to be the biggest market ever. And I want to also just mention, I wonder, does everyone understand the top causes of death, heart disease, sarcopenia, Alzheimer's, cancer? Do we know what the root cause of all of them is? Any ideas? You want to shout it out? Cells in essence? Okay, so it's kind of part of it. The answer is actually the aging process. And the FDA doesn't yet recognize aging as a disease. So clinical trials for the therapeutics that are targeting these initiatives and these diseases of aging are done in a kind of like misaligned way. And there are some challenges there, but there are other business models that can help you kind of get around that. Either way, the point is, let's say you're in the 1800s and I tell you, you're in a horse and buggy, but 100 years or so, you're going to be flying in metal tubes with wings across oceans. 1969, we get to the moon. And you say, we're going to have this device that has more computing power with internet, and then more computing power than that which got you to the moon in the future. These futures are really difficult for the general public to wrap their heads around. And what we're trying to do today is explain it as best we can, because scientists are not the best at communicating. It's just not part of the academic program. So please believe them when they say this is the next thing and it's going to disrupt everything. And with that, I would like to get into a little bit about what is our current state, what is the healthcare system right now, and what is it going to be, and why?
So the current healthcare system, you probably heard this term, is really a sick care system.
Exactly.
It's waits until symptoms develop and then treats the implications of those or the underlying supposed diagnosis of those, which is a very limited view. Well after they've manifested and when things are very hard to correct or change. And ultimately, to achieve longevity, we need to shift to a healthcare mindset, which is how do you maximize the health and quality of life that people have? How do you detect conditions early before there are symptoms when the interventions can have the biggest impact?
I feel like Triatomic and Flagship should join forces. So at our 2019 annual meeting, the timing turned out to be somewhat prescient. We announced a couple of new initiatives, one of which was preemptive health and medicine, to get precisely at this question of the earliest drivers of disease before guidelines or a physician's textbook says this is a disease. So before you have end-stage liver disease, you have NASH. Before you have NASH, you have NAFLD. But what do you have going on before NAFLD? You have a bunch of biodynamic changes in your body which drive you towards ultimately end-stage liver disease. And the more we can intervene at that level, the greater the chances we have of longevity, however you want to define it. It's a huge theme, and we now have the tools to do this. We have better imaging tools. We have computational tools. We have ways to interrogate biology that we had never understood before. And we have programmable medicines, per the title of our conversation here, which that was not a tool even 5 years ago.
And I don't think that our industry, our medical system is using it. One, they don't know about it. Two, it doesn't fit in the system that they're familiar with or the training that they're familiar with or the incentive structures for that matter. So you're going to see a lot of disruption. One thing I want to mention is, the healthcare system right now is great. If you get in a car crash or, you have an infection, they know how to treat the thing that happens to you. The question is, do they know why? The root cause of a chronic disease. And they're not looking at that necessarily. And I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit, Abby, about commercialization as it relates to the changing system.
I mean, there's a lot of discussion on how value-based care is going to transform healthcare, and I think the verdict is out. But I want to, at least give credit where credit's due, where when things are going well. So I think the rollout of GLP-1s and, Ozempic, Mounjaro, if we want to talk about commercialization of longevity medicine, you could point to that as a wonderful case study, because ultimately these drugs are going to extend health span by targeting one of the top 3 causes of death and disease, which is diabetes and being overweight. And if you think about the commercialization of that, like with many existing drugs, think where Botox came from. A lot of medicine started over here, and then people understood how it could be used. And at the end of the day, it comes down to reimbursement. Who is getting paid for what? And so when GLP-1s are being limited in their access to, in terms of who can be reimbursed and accessibility, I do believe over the next 5-10 years, they will become readily available to people who are the right candidates for them with the right reimbursement. So I think the commercialization piece, really in the US at least, gets down to the ability for policymakers to make sure that we are getting these things reimbursed, because without reimbursement, unfortunately, the world doesn't work. I would say one other point, though, that's a byproduct of this reimbursement model is increasingly, and I'm sure many of you have heard the term precision medicine, concierge medicine. A lot is getting pushed out of the actual healthcare system, out of the hospital 4 walls. Not a lot. There are cases where it's being pushed into private pay, and the percentage of the out-of-pocket spend for Americans continues to go up. And so I think what we're also going to unfortunately continue to see, especially in our space, is this fragmentation between those who have to get it reimbursed and those who can afford to pay out of pocket. So we're going to be in this awkward stage for the next decade or two, because the reimbursement models are going to lag the user desires and behavior.
I think also, coming from Singularity University, 6 years ago, we were talking about the future of insurance. And because of not only the accelerating but converging technologies and AI, machine learning, the human error associated with the reimbursements is also going to shift. Mm-hmm. So the insurance companies have to evolve anyways. I'm curious, just to move on, and we can come back after, Nir, we're talking about commercialization let's talk about the aging society, not necessarily maintaining a youthful state. Can our society afford more older adults? And how does the FDA play into that?
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to second many of the things here so that you'll know that there's a consensus. And I agree that first we have, how do you say it, not to die, or we have to get there.
First, don't die.
Right. and I think that's important. And then we can do something about it, right? So for me, I think if you got cancer, you want to discover it early. But for me, if you got cancer, this is preventable. I think. So what I think people are missing a lot is the fact that aging, we know that aging has a biology, because you can look around and see who's older and who's younger, but that this biology drives diseases, which means that you have to target it before you have diseases, then you can prevent them. Yeah. You can be born with genes for Alzheimer, but you're not demented when you're born, or 1 year or 10 years or 50 years, right? It has the biology of aging, and that's the case for every disease. So we have to move it to sooner, and we have to think about prevention, because prevention is what allowed us from 100 years of evolution, where life expectancy was between 20 and 30, to triple our lives.
Being intentional about it. It just happened. Now we're actually being intentional. So
right.
Rate of acceleration.
It didn't just happen. We harnessed agriculture, we cleaned the water, we built sewers, we did immunization, we give cholesterol, right? There's lots of,
Surgeons learned how to,
but that's the example.
disinfect their hands.
Right.
And all of a sudden, lifespan doubled.
And that's what we have to do now. Okay. So from my study in centenarians, I learned really important thing. First of all, the most important thing was, okay, do they get sick when we all get sick and now they're just sick for 60 more years? And the answer is no. Their health span and lifespan goes together. They are sick. They get sick 20, 30 years after, their daughter-in-law or son-in-law. Actually, it's true. That's our study was designed. And not only that, they have contraction of morbidity. They're sick very little time at the end of their lives. In other words, they're the example of what we're trying to do. Live long, live healthier, or live healthier, live long, and die.
Without suffering as much as we're used to.
Right. So the CDC, by the way, have shown that the medical costs in the last 2 years of life of somebody who dies after 100 is third of those who dies when they are 70. Okay, so we started talking about this longevity dividend. And now there's Andrew Scott from London London Business School, and he says, Guy, you don't know even to calculate because you're talking about your guys are not in the hospital, but what are they doing? They're traveling, they're shopping, they're buying, investing. So the economic value of targeting this aging process is $360 trillion over 10 years, like a huge number that we cannot afford not to do, okay? Because healthcare is so expensive. So the real revolution here is we have to spend time on our health rather than spend time on the disease. As for the FDA and how do we achieve that, so we have a project that's going on, will start this year, where we take a drug that is a generic drug called metformin that is actually was for aging and then became diabetes, but it's really what we call a gerotherapeutic. And all the studies about it have been done. But we sat with the FDA and we said we want to repurpose this for basically an indication that's like aging, a cluster of diseases and mortality. And the really main goal of the study, not to show that metformin works, but to get an approval so that pharmaceuticals, biotech pharmaceuticals will really get into this field. You need a business plan, right? So to have a business plan and to come in and really make an impact with more drugs, better drugs, combination drugs, and really change the face of aging.
Can you also tell us about Loyal and their recent approval? Loyal, the dog aging project?
Oh, I didn't want to talk about it.
Oh, you did or you didn't?
Well, animal models, right, are... The nice thing about animals, they all age kind of like us. The hair, the skin, diseases, different diseases, but we can measure that. So some of the ways to get ahead with drugs is to test them on animals. And some of the drugs tested of animals are making an impact, sometimes over-represented or, not truly represented, but...
Not yet, at least. But it really depends on, I think the funding. And the root cause of an issue with funding is mindset and just a lack of awareness of what's actually happening in the field. So I want to pivot a bit and talk more about the technology behind it. So Jeff, maybe you can tell us about how AI advancements and digitizing chemistry as it relates to how pharma makes drugs is an important focus right now.
Sure. There's huge progress in application of AI towards drug development across categories. I already mentioned the development of cell therapies and gene therapies, immunotherapies, biologics, and chemistry, small molecule drugs. We have two, actually, portfolio companies.
Wait, can I actually pause you for a second?
Sorry.
Does everyone know what Jeff just said? All of those
Oh, sorry.
small molecules. Does anyone want a refresher? Yes. Can we just quickly go through?
Sure. So there's different categories of therapeutics. Cell therapies and gene therapies are kind of the very leading edge where you're typically taking cells. They can be cells, your cells from the body, or they can be generic cells that have been developed, and then equipping them or arming them to be able to treat disease in your body. And examples of that would be things like CAR T therapies for cancer. It's chimeric antigen receptor therapy, where you take immune cells from the body and then equip and arm them to fight the cancer that you have.
And then
The next category of therapeutics is a broad category of immunotherapies that actually could include some of those cell therapies and gene therapies, but more broadly, it's how do you activate the immune system to do the right things. And that cuts across categories as well. But for example, in cancer, drugs like Keytruda that essentially remove a checkpoint from the immune system where cancer is putting up a flag that says, I'm just fine, don't attack me. The Keytruda, for example, removes that checkpoint so that the immune system can do its job. The next category is biologic drugs, or sort of protein-style drugs, antibody-antigen drugs, where there's a broad category of those. And then the final one I mentioned was small molecule or chemical drugs, which is a very broad historic category. Each of those is seeing massive innovation driven by AI, where we're now able to generate data on what are the specific drivers of disease, what are the hooks or targets for a drug to target, what's the mechanism of that happening, and then how do you develop drugs or discover drugs for doing that. In the last category around small molecule or chemical drugs, chemistry-based drugs, it's a very large universe of possibility. So we have a company in our portfolio called Chemify. Their goal is to digitize chemistry. Their estimate is that there's about 35 trillion makeable chemical compounds. If you look at the drug universe today, there's about 30,000 drug or drug-like small molecule chemical compounds that you can buy today. So there's a vast universe that is waiting to be discovered, explored, optimized, and ultimately exploited for good. And the mechanism that they use for doing that is they've created there's two dimensions, a digital and a physical. They've created a language called KDL that describes the synthesis of all of the possible makeable compounds. And when you have that vast space, that universe now described in digital terms, in code, it's literally computer code that's both reaction complete and Turing complete, which is a fancy way of saying that you can express all of the logic you need in code for doing anything. Then it makes that space predictable, where you can go from digital code to using AI to predict the in-physical properties of any chemical compound without actually having to make it. It also now makes that space explorable with AI tools, machine learning, deep learning, generative AI tools. And then the other side of it is they have a physical manifestation that they call a computer, which is a little bit too cute of a term, but is literally an automated robotic platform that can take the code and execute that. So by analogy, it's sort of like a 3D printer for chemistry. And if you've ever used a 3D printer, you can make a 3D model, or you can go to a marketplace, there's a bunch of them, you can download a model, download it to the printer, and it'll faithfully render that object that you created. The computer from Chemify is that for chemistry, going from code to in-synthesized compound. And that has significant implications for how you think about drug discovery and AI drug discovery, where many companies, they vary in terms of the data inputs and their exact algorithms, but ultimately they're generating a compound, a hypothesized compound that they think has interesting drug-like properties. They then need to translate that to the real world. And Chemify has been a key partner in doing that translation of how do you take this hypothesized compound, how do you actually synthesize it, how do you optimize it, and bring it to the real world. So since we signed them as a portfolio company, they've signed up $100 million worth of development deals with different AI drug development companies.
Jeff, I'm wondering, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this the following a very simplified and accurate way to kind of explain if you see aging and biology as an engineering problem and you look at it like a car and you have all the different pieces of the car and then you upload that into a computer and you have a digital version that you can move things around and you can literally modify elements of the car however you want. And now you're using AI, machine learning, all this new technology that's actually not new anymore. It's just being applied differently to change our genetic expression, to tell the body and the cells to do different things in a virtual arena almost, and in a physical one, and also at a mass scale. So drug discovery, people used to be in the lab one by one, hand pipetting, things take time, you need to watch it. Now you have robotics and you have automation and you have machine learning and video high throughput screening. It's literally watching how the organisms are reacting to thousands of drugs that are being tested on them. And let's say hypothetically, this is a little bit different. The organism only lives 30 days. You can literally watch with your eye how their functions are changing. Are they getting more sluggish in 3 weeks versus 4 weeks? Do they die earlier? But the point is that what Jeff is saying is that everything is actually on another level of manipulation and visibility now. And honestly, it's going to continue to accelerate and change in ways we can't even fathom. But let me tell you, the time frame is going to be ridiculously fast. And with that said, was that okay? Did I kind
Yes, but we are digitizing biology and changing the time constants around how we do things.
And you don't have to actually test a human. Maybe you'll test a tissue or you test the computer model. I'm wondering, maybe you can talk about some of the significant breakthroughs from some of your organizations. And also, what do you think about market and timing? A little bit more detail.
Maybe I'll discuss two vignettes. First off, building off of where you guys just were, we founded a business called Celerity a number of years ago, where we asked ourselves the question, what if we could create a mathematical model that represented the genetic state of a cell? Would that be valuable? All right. And you could imagine if you could do that, and if you had a model of a certain integrity, you could distinguish between a cell in a disease state, maybe in an aging state, and a cell in a healthy state. And then if you could do that, you could begin to look at drugs as interventions that change the network phenomena of a disease cell to a healthy cell. Well, it turns out that bit of science fiction is actually science, right?
We're not in the 1800s or 1969 anymore.
Which is pretty extraordinary. Around the same time, we asked ourselves the question, what if we could train a computer to learn what a protein was? Now, of course, Nir knows this. People can spend a 50, 60-year academic career learning about proteins. We said, well, what if we could just train a computer to do that? And the answer is you can. And today, our business, Generate Biomedicines, if we show it a target that we want to hit at some biological function inside a body, it can spit out in a matter of minutes 30, 40, 50, 60 different candidates of proteins that could bind to that target in a way which would address the underlying disease. And then we can take those candidates, synthesize them, test them in our wet lab, and see what actually works in humans. This is mind-boggling. The best protein synthesis in the world would tell you that historically that would take years to do and with an uncertain chance of success. Now we can do this in minutes and with a very high probability of success.
Things are going to change immediately before your eyes. So we only have a few minutes left. What I want to say, and then I'm just going to give everyone the floor one more time, is what you've seen here in the last 40 minutes is different approaches to different ways of thinking about longevity. You have the preventative mechanisms. You have the damage repair after the fact. You have the diagnostic platforms. You have working on people that are already healthy right now and keeping them healthy versus aging populations that need a different care, a different approach, a different white glove. And then all the different implications from a commercialization perspective, from an investment perspective, from a regulatory perspective. I think the bottom line here is that there's enormous opportunity that is underrepresented because there's just not a lot of awareness. This stuff is early stage. And because of that, they don't have business development teams and marketing teams to package it and put it in front of consumers. So what you're getting here is early access to the thing that's going to disrupt everything. And it will have implications and opportunities with all different industries. And with that said, I mean, these guys are pioneering in amazing ways. Is there anything else that you want to leave the audience with, Nir?
Yeah, I want to give the following example, just that you understand the potential. We can take a sperm of a 90-year-old man and an egg of a 50-year-old woman and create a baby, right? Maybe out of the body, the fertilization out of the body. But when the baby is formed, when the first cells are dividing, and you measure the age of the cells, they don't remember the age of the parents. They start in 0. We figured it how to do it in this example. Now we're figuring how to do it for the rest of the body, which really means that if I think of the future, let's just throw 50 years, so I'm not going to be around here to be responsible for that. But in 50 years, a 20-year-old guy will come, or woman will come and get a treatment every few months, every year, that will erase their aging, and they could be Peter Pan. They could, forever young. This is the potential, and parts of it are being employed now in biotech and industry.
Anything else that you guys want to say?
I would just say, when we talk about what's relevant for this group today on a personal level, you talk about the prevention, and I think we would all agree that 401ks are a good idea, right? I'm serious. You've got corporate match and you've got compounding interest. Healthcare, our cells are dollars and cents sitting in a bank account compounding. And so when we think about what we can do today in terms of our own behaviors, usually I have this talk and we're at some healthcare convention in Vegas. And so I always, it's always ironic, say, stop drinking. But, alcohol kills your cells or it modifies your cells and hurts you. But I think one of the things that brings us back down to reality of 50 years from now is that we all can start understanding our own bodies and making our own choices. And it is like compound interest. And so I think that's part of the message when we talk about aging. It always feels like somebody else's problem, like, oh, that's down the road, that's over there. And I think we would all agree on this panel that it starts at birth, to your point, Nir. It starts at birth, and it starts both because of the chemistry, but also because of behavior. And I think that's a piece that no amount of chemistry can ultimately completely eradicate, are the decisions we make.
So I was born in 1960. I grew up in the era of IT. When I first learned to program computers, I created punch cards, which I fed into a sorter that went to a mini computer. Boy, have things changed. This is where we are. We are at the punch card stage of biology right now. The 21st century, biology will be the 21st century what information technology was to the
But that timing is massively reduced.
That's great.
So one thing I want to leave everyone with is there's a lot of misinformation out there. People really don't know the true situation. Lifespan.io has been around for 10 years before the industry was even a thing. We have a very stringent code of ethics for our news outlet, which covers the entire field. If you want to know what's going on, please feel free to visit lifespan.io. Reach out. We're here to help. And obviously get the contact information. There's a lot more where this came from, and I appreciate you being here. And thank you guys so much. And to the organizers, stay tuned.